afternoon, everyone. I'm here to ruin your day again. Anyways, today we have Chopin. Very good album. By the by, on a side note, that's one of the few people I visited both where his heart is buried in Warsaw and where his body is buried in Paris. He's been divided up like that, so anyways. With that being said, we shall proceed on this lovely, beautiful British spring day and enjoy kind of maybe a moment of, well, I wouldn't call myself a ray of sunshine now, but something a little different than just the drizzling rain, okay? So today's subject, as we saw in the headline, was Sunday. A day we've all experienced every week. So, anyways, Sunday. What is the big deal with Sunday? Okay, the question was about doing work on Sundays and things like that. When is it okay? What kind of work is okay? How to keep the Lord's commandment is what it boils down to, right? We remember those commandments. God gave them to us. Okay? And so, first, just to kind of refresh our memory a little bit, we go back to the book of Exodus, chapter 20. And it says, chapter 20, verse 8, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your manservant or your maidservant, or your cattle, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So, we have the words of God himself right there telling us that the Sabbath day is a day of rest. The seventh day is a holy day, not meant for just work or whatever, right? And so then, of course, we turn to another hit in the spiritual genre, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Good book. Okay, if you haven't got one, get one. Anyways. So, we turn to that, and we go to number 2184, okay, 2184. And it says, "Just as God rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done, human life has a rhythm of work and rest. The institution of the Lord's Day helps everyone enjoy adequate rest and leisure, or leisure if you're from Britain, to cultivate their familial, cultural, social, and religious lives. On Sundays and other holy days of obligation, the faithful are to refrain from engaging in work or activities that hinder the worship of God," so on and so forth, so on and so forth. "Family needs or important social service can legitimately excuse one from the obligation of Sunday rest," so on and so forth. Then we go to the next one, 2187. "Sanctifying Sundays and holy days requires a common effort," so on and so forth. "Traditional activities, sports, restaurants, etc., and social necessities, public services," so on and so forth, "requires some people to work on Sundays, but everyone should still take care to set aside sufficient time for leisure," and so on and so forth. So, the Catechism of the Catholic Church reminds us that Sunday is a day of rest, okay? Meaning not laziness, right? There's a fine line between laziness and rest, but Sunday is a day for rest, for relaxation, for joyous gatherings, I guess you would say, with family, but first and foremost with God. It's one of the 10 Commandments, after all. It's like right up to the top, okay? It's one of the first 3 even. So this tells us the importance of it. It's one of the first 3 commandments that God gave to Israel in this covenant that he made with them on Mount Sinai. So that's important. And so we stop and think, how does our treatment of the Lord's Day, Sunday, stack up to those guidelines from the church, but going all the way back to God's commandment himself, where he said, "I created the whole world and everything in 6 days, folks." Okay? 6 days. And he still had that one day to rest. So how does our lives match up to that? Well, there's a few different things we can see. One is we see that business as usual on Sundays has become the norm now in the United States of America and in most of the Western world. In Poland, it was still the case that a majority of your businesses were closed on Sundays. The mall would be open, go figure. Certain restaurants and grocery stores and stuff like that, but the majority of your other work businesses were closed on Sundays, just because it was deemed not necessary to have those things, And so we look at that, but we look at our own world, how out of control it's gotten. It's hard to find somebody who's not working on Sunday, either out of necessity, because some people have to, unfortunately, but very often it's labor that we ourselves take on, that we choose to do on that day, right? And so the prohibition has been against what we call servile work. What is servile work? There's a lot of different ways that the moralists explain that. But what it boils down to, the easiest way to educate that is, does it have to be done today? Is it necessary for it to be done this particular day, or can it wait? Number one. Like making food, okay? Some people like to actually make food. Be that as it may. But when you gotta eat, right? Okay? So there's a reason why some restaurants are open. It kind of serves a purpose for people such as myself, who maybe don't make food in the normal way. Or gas stations, for instance, right? Sometimes we have to travel, and even travel can be considered a good thing on Sunday, of course, after you've gone to church. Visiting relatives, family, that's one of the things the church says. St. John Paul II wrote an apostolic exhortation actually called Dies Domini, saying that, one of the things we should do on Sundays is visit family, is spend time together as families, to take care of each other, to relax, to talk, so on and so forth, right? But the problem is we've gone way, way past that. We have a lot of things that are absolutely unnecessary taking place on Sundays. For instance, certain factories. Now, I don't fault the workers, okay? But certain factories operating 24/7, practically 365. Is it necessary? Okay. I like my cars as much as the next person, but is it necessary to build them on Sundays? And other things, certain other goods that we can do without, for instance, for the moment. That people need time to rest. And what does this draw our attention to? A few different things. Okay? So we look, what does the Lord had to say about that in different revelations? We can go back to, I don't know if anybody remembers when I did a homily on the subject. For those of you who weren't sleeping, it was Devotion to the Holy Faith. Okay? And it goes back to the 1840s. 1847. Okay? We have that. And then we have another very pertinent one. It's the apparition of Our Lady of La Salette. This is one that's very, very deeply connected to that, okay? So, we're going to look at those two things in particular to kind of give us a guide. We're going to look at La Salette first, because La Salette's 1846. So, actually, it's probably a little later, maybe a year or two later than the revelations to Sister Mary of St. Peter. What happens in La Salette? La Salette's a little podunk village, okay? It's like Podunksville nowhere, out in France. In the 1800s, there's really not a whole lot going on anymore. France is still recovering from the French Revolution, when the church was totally destroyed practically over there. Religious institutions closed, so it's still in recovery mode from all that. But we see that God still has a great love for the country. She's called the eldest daughter of the church for a reason, because that's where some of the biggest religious institutions were built, so on and so forth. These great cathedrals we have, and the great missionaries that came from there, even to the United States. A lot of them came from France, right? Those were the days when there was still a lot of faith there. It happened eventually. It happens all the time now. I guess I dropped it a few too many times. Anyways, we go to La Salette, and it begins with these two children who are out tending the sheep, and it says that they're out tending these sheep, and they came upon a vision. It says, the glorious woman who was weeping, she now stood up, her hands fell away from her face and crossed her breast. Melanie and Maximin, these are the two children, were struck by her beauty. She was exquisite, the girl thought to herself. Her face was so beautiful, even though both children could see that the tears hadn't stopped. The woman wore a light, long white dress which seemed to glitter with small pearls of light. A translucent white headdress covered her head, where a tall crown rested. Across her shoulders she also wore a shawl, which was trimmed with roses. And there was a large yellow apron tied about her waist. White slippers fixed with pearls and gold buckles were on her feet. The children also saw that a cross was hung on a chain around her neck. "Come to me, my children," she said to them. The words were spoken tenderly. She addressed them in French. "Do not be afraid. I am here to tell you something of the greatest importance." So on and so forth, so on and so forth. The woman with a queenly bearing moved slightly toward them. The globe of shimmering light that had enclosed her now enveloped all of them. And this is what she said. "If my people will not obey, I shall be compelled to loose my son's arm," she told the children. "It is so heavy, so pressing, that I can no longer restrain it. How long have I suffered for you?" But the woman, though still crying, noticed the confused look Melanie gave to Maximin. "Ah, you do not understand in French, my children," she said, smiling. Then she began again the local dialect. And she said, "I have appointed," speaking for her son, Christ, otherwise known as, right? "I have appointed 6 days for working. The 7th day I have reserved for myself, and no one will give it to me. This is it that causes the weight of my son's arm to be crushing." And she continued, "The cart drivers cannot swear without bringing in my son's name. These are the 2 things that make my son's arm so burdensome." God was being dishonored, the woman insisted, and the price of such abuse would be costly. "If the harvest is spoiled, it is your own fault," she said. "The potato crop, which had been destroyed the year before, will yield no better during this year," she predicted. "Even walnuts and grapes grown in the region would rot before they would ripe, and the grain too would never be productively gathered. It would never find its way into the bread that sustained them," she said, shaking her head in sorrow. "A great famine is coming," she told the children. "But before that food shortage would occur, many of the young children of the area would die of a serious disease. The parents would be helpless. There would be no help for the young ones." And so on and so forth. So that's the basis of that apparition right there. And then we turn to this one, the apparitions, the revelations Christ gave to Sister Mary of St. Peter. And this is a very interesting one. In telling her to promote devotion to the holy face of Jesus, right? One of the things he said was that the devotion to the holy face has a twofold purpose of reparation for blasphemy and profanation of Sunday and holy days of obligation. And Christ said, "By blasphemy the sinner curses him to his face, attacks him publicly, nullifies his redemption, and pronounces his own judgment and condemnation. God's justice irritated particularly for sins that directly outrage the majesty of God, communism, atheism, so on and so forth, and the desecration of Sundays." And Christ said, "The executioners crucified me on Friday. Christians crucify me on Sunday." Now, if that doesn't hit you to the heart, I don't know what will. That Christ himself would say that we, the people who say we love him and believe him, are crucifying him on the day he appointed for us to worship and to rest. So that's a strong one. And keep in mind, these things take place in the 1840s. Mary warns them. This is what will happen. Early 1840s. What happened shortly after that? Karl Marx writes the Communist Manifesto, which brings about class warfare, which divides the worker and the employer, and elevates the worker, even though communism used them as a tool, to the level of God almost, and creating even a day of the worker, and everything's about the worker, which work is good. I worked myself, right? That's a good thing. But the thing is that communism elevates the worker above God. That the worker is the most important and God is second place, because they even tried to do away with Sundays, right? And so, this is one of the problems with our profanation of Sunday and doing things that are unnecessary, is that I'm going directly against what God himself asked me to do, which is find time to rest, to pray, to relax, to visit, to do things we enjoy with our families, stuff like that, right? Even if we enjoy hiding from them, we can hide from them all day on Sunday if we want to, right? There's that option. But there are a lot of different things, and the saddest part is that we as Christians, as followers of Christ, are called to give that example. And how often do we fail to do that? A lot of people say, well, I enjoy doing so-and-so, or such and such, gardening, or mowing my lawn. I like doing it, so it's not really work. Well, I like working on cars, okay? But that is one hard rule I will not break unless it is absolutely necessary, because I'll need that car on Monday, for instance. I won't touch them on Sunday. I will not do any work on them on Sunday. Why? Because it's the one day a week that I can spend with God, relaxing, things like that. It's the one day. And so the question I always, pose when people ask me, well, what is servile work and why can't I do this and this on Sunday? The question always is, Is it absolutely necessary to be done that day? Or could it wait? Could it wait? If I had to stand there before God the next day and explain it, what would I say? Lord, I couldn't have done this. I couldn't have done this Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday or Saturday. I had to do it on Sunday. That was the only day. And God will know whether or not that's true. So, at the end of the day, we don't want to dig our own holes any deeper than we have to, okay? So, let's try to keep that in mind and really honor that Lord's Day. And, that's one of the big problems in our world we see as we ignore these messages, especially La Salette, what happens? You have successive natural disasters and chaos in the world. And how many wars have taken place in that short period of time since those apparitions in 1846? We had the growth of the communist state, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all these other wars we've gone through in between, all the wars the other countries have gone through, how many famines, how many global stock market issues. It's amazing when you stop and look in such a short period of time, such great social upheaval and unrest. We have the other problem of workers being exploited, for instance, right? It's a well-known fact that in the late 1800s, some manufacturing laborers had to work 100 plus hours a week. We have the exploitation of work and the failure to really do our best sometimes, that we're just going to work, get it over with, done, so on and so forth. We're not going to put the effort into it that we could. So these are all side effects of our refusal to respect the Lord's Day, Sunday. And so the thing is that there are things that have to be done, but there are things that do not have to be done. That's what it boils down to. So, is it absolutely necessary or not? Can it wait till Monday or can it not? I mean, the commandment, God's words were He gave us 6 days to work and 1 to rest, so He doesn't ask for that much to begin with. So the thing is that our country was built, we know that even up until the 1800s, it was forbidden to work on Sundays in the United States even. Shops were closed, everything was closed. So, like I said, outside of cases of absolute emergency, that's just the way we were able to survive. Somehow we built the country that way even. So the questions are always, like I said, looking at what Christ Himself said, looking at what God told us in the gospel, is it necessary? Absolutely necessary. Is it worth putting the honor of God on the line for or not? And with that being said, that's how we have to look at those things. And so, we try to keep that in mind, that God created Sunday for us at the end of the day, and the thing is that, are we using it well? Are we treating it with the respect it deserves? And what can I offer to God at the end of the day, And so may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.